to be a very nice person, very charming, very committed to her mission, very businesslike, and very goal-oriented.
She is very kind, and she's very thoughtful and considerate. And she's funny. She laughs a lot, and she just makes you feel so joyful when you know her, and she's a very loyal friend.
Of course, she's a ballerina, was a ballerina, and her posture and her position makes her stand out. And of course, I think the whole community looks upon her as still as a ballerina.
There was the two parts of Jean. There is the dancer, the artist herself, and there's the visionary for the arts.
I go into the theatre very, very early. I like to be in the theatre a couple of hours before the performance, before anyone else is there, set everything out. I would set my towel, my makeup, just so, the hairpins, and I had a whole rigmarole that I went through, from the hot shower, getting into my tights with a warm gown on, then doing my hair, the makeup. Then I would go and take one of the studios upstairs, turn the lights off, and I would do like a meditation and a floor bar on the floor, very slow exercises on the floor, and then I would be ready to join the company for the warm-up before they went into performance.
JeanAllenby Weidner, prima ballerina, socialite, fundraiser, businesswoman, choreographer, teacher, trendsetter, began her life's adventure on the continent of Africa.
The Allenby is my stage name. I was born Jean Theobald. My father was British. My grandfather was British. My grandmother was South African. And my father came to Rhodesia, which was in Central Africa, a British colony. Towards the end of the war, he had been shot down. He was a fighter pilot flying over Germany and had burst his eardrums, managed to escape, and was sent out to an RAF training station in Rhodesia, met my mother, married her, and never returned to England.
One of 6 children, 4 brothers and a baby sister, Jean and her family grew up in Bulawayo, the industrial capital of Rhodesia. Here, Jean was introduced to dance at an early age.
I grew up in very unusual surroundings. We were very fortunate. Although I took ballet from the age of 4.5, practically as soon as I could walk, my mother put my sister and I to dancing because my grandfather was very Victorian, large gentleman with bristling handlebar moustaches that he used to wax. He would never let us even wear trousers as girls. We were very Victorian in the upbringing, and my mother was never allowed to get into the arts. It was not the thing to do. So as soon as my sister and I could walk, we were put to ballet.
For Jean, there was no turning back. She told her mother after the very first lesson she wanted to be a ballerina. But those early years were filled with more than dancing. Growing up, Jean and her siblings played in the African bush country, often barefoot. And they had a variety of unusual pets, including buck, sheep, tortoise, owls, and even a monkey.
In fact, the funny thing is my grandmother that I never knew, I knew my grandfather's second wife, died as the result of a monkey bite. She got tetanus and died as a result of this. And my mother never ever forbade me. When I brought back a baby monkey, she allowed me to keep it, which years afterwards I realized that must have been quite a sacrifice because she lost her mother as a 14-year-old.
While Jean and her family enjoyed a comfortable life in Rhodesia, it was not all dancing and fun. During her growing years, the African continent and Rhodesia erupted in bush wars, and Jean was introduced to the dark side of life that war brings.
Towards the end of my teenage years, the war was quite horrible. There were many, many young men around with limbs blown off because the big thing was to mine the roads. We were not allowed to go out of town. More than a half a mile or so, you were escorted everywhere with jeeps with Bren guns mounted on the backs and army officers, and there were, low-flying planes spotting all the time, and it was sort of a very sad time, I think, for the blacks and for the whites.
Still, even under adverse conditions, life goes on, and like all young people, Jean attended school. Her education was British, and she performed very well, with the exception of one minor episode in her first year of high school.
My first year in high school, we had an English teacher who was from overseas, from home, they would say, because England was home to us. And I had a little brown house snake that I used to sleep inside my blouse, just sort of curled around my tummy. And it was my first year in high school, and I'd been having breakfast and feeding him, forgotten to take him out and put him in his box. I went to school, and I was so used to the snake always curled around my stomach. And we're doing penmanship, British penmanship, and this young lady from England leans over my shoulder, takes my hand to help me form a letter, and this little snake head comes curling out right in her face, and she must have fainted 5 times before they got her out of the classroom. And I was threatened with suspension, of course, and all sorts of dire things.
Of course, she was not suspended, and studied hard to graduate from high school early. When not in school, Jean was involved in dance, dance, dance.
My sister and I would most probably compete in 30 different competitions. We did ballet, tap, Greek, Spanish, song and dance, character, national. We were so fortunate. We competed in all the different kinds of art forms, dramatics, and that was the British way. They called them Eisteddfods, and kids came from all over Central Africa and competed, and our examiners came from London. And so that was one of the things I think that prepared me to be such a rounded artist once I became a professional.
Jean's ballet training was British Royal Academy. It was a very solid training program, and Jean performed exceptionally. Examinations were held each year, and in Jean's teen years, she became the only student in 30 years from all of Central Africa to receive honors on all of her major examinations, receiving the highest honors ever awarded in Africa for her London Advanced Examinations. As a result, she was awarded a scholarship to the Royal Ballet School in London, but instead joined the Cape Performing Arts Board Ballet Company in Cape Town, South Africa. But her mother insisted she first attend a year of business and economic college. During the summer of that year, she worked as a secretary for the editor of a local newspaper office. At the end of the year, she went to Cape Town to join the ballet. It provided an excellent opportunity for Jean to further develop her talent.
Toured the whole of Africa with the company, about 60 dancers. We did a classical repertoire, so I started in the quarter ballet, and by the time I left Cape Town, I was their principal ballerina, and I had danced Swan Lake, Giselle, Sleeping Beauty, Coppelia, even some of the more obscure classics like Sylvia and Daphnis and Chloe, which are very beautiful old classical ballet.
It was in Cape Town, working with artistic director David Poole, that Jean developed her dramatic abilities. After 9 years with the Cape Ballet, Jean decided to take a trip to Europe. She visited Stuttgart, Germany in hopes of taking a class with world-famous choreographer John Cranko.
When I visited Germany, I asked if I could do a class, and he misunderstood me and thought I was auditioning and offered me a job, and I was devastated, thrilled but devastated, because I was on contract to open the new Nico Milan Theatre in Cape Town at the end of that season, and here I thought that if I didn't take this job, he wouldn't hold it for me. Well, he held it for well over a year.
Jean finished her commitment in Africa and then returned to Germany, joining the acclaimed Stuttgart Ballet in time for their first major U.S. tour in 1969. The company provided Jean the opportunity to perform a wide variety of dance styles. During this time, Jean performed in more than 80 of the great opera houses of the world, including the historic theaters of Russia.
To be dancing in these great theaters with Ulanova, who is the greatest of the living ballerinas, sitting in the audience, and the Russian people coming down and throwing little gifts and flowers onto the stage. It's an amazing thing, you know, for a Western company. It was the first company to have gone into Russia since the war, actually.
It was a time of oppression in Russia. Socialism was at its peak, and yet Jean was humbled by the Russian people's love of the arts.
simple, simple people that come from working in the fields or whatever they do. I mean, rough people, peasants, as they call them in Russia proudly. They would go into the theater by the thousands. The one big theater, I think, was like 3,800 people it took, and you would see them where they put their bales of whatever they were carrying, wood or, I don't know, parcels tied up or bits of string or whatever, and they would go into the theater, and that was their release, that was their fantasy.
Another highlight on the tour for Jean and the company was coming to America. The lights and attraction of New York City was enticing, but above all, dancing at the Met was a thrill.
I came down off the elevator and went through a corridor onto the right-hand side of the stage, and I stood at the back of the stage and I looked out and I got a lump in my throat because the stage was so enormous and this red velvet, these tier boxes going up. I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to make it from here to there in the manege that I have to do. So I was petrified.
Jean excelled with the company, becoming one of 4 leading ballerinas for the Stuttgart Ballet. It was a fulfilling and exciting period. She married Stuart Kerschel, the company's music conductor. Then, in the late 1970s, on a return trip from the United States to Germany, tragedy struck when the company's director, Kranko, ingested food into his lung. An emergency landing in Shannon, Ireland was too late. He was dead on arrival at the city's hospital. It was a solemn trip back to Stuttgart.
And by the time we got back to the Opera House, the steps of the Opera House, which go down into a park, there's maybe 63 steps up to the front of the Opera House, you couldn't see a piece of stone because they were covered with little floral gifts and bouquets and cards and things from people just in the street that had heard that this man was dead. It was the most devastating thing for all of us.
A new director, American Glenn Tetley, brought changes, providing Jean an opportunity to learn contemporary ballet and grand technique. In 1981, Jean was designated Artist of the Year by the Nouvelle Choreographic Association of West Germany. Shortly thereafter, she left the company as she and her husband moved to the heartland of America.
We came to the Midwest because Stuart had been a ballet conductor for many years, one of the top 3 in the world, I believe, and wanted to do symphony conducting, and so he took an orchestra in the Midwest that had a good reputation and that he could build his symphonic rep on and build the orchestra up. And I found myself in a cornfield in Indiana, literally, which reminded me a lot of Africa. I loved it. It was like, you know, home.
To keep active, Jean started a ballet school, which turned into a ballet company. The school grew to over 400 students, and the company grew to 12 full-time performing artists. During this time, Jean not only learned the business of dance, but she also choreographed some 20 dance pieces, which received favorable reviews from dance magazines. She and Kerschel also divorced during this period. In her 6th year with the company, Jean was beginning work on choreographing a new dance. She felt she needed to get away from the day-to-day management to clear her head. She came to Sarasota to stay with friends. It was a visit that would change her life and Sarasota forever.
I was staying with these friends and I had about a week to get this ballet done, and they were invited out to a birthday party at the Bird Key Yacht Club, and that was with Ken Weidner, and he insisted that I come to the dinner, and I tried to get out of it because I was busy working. However, finally I went to the dinner and met Ken, and by this time I had been divorced for nearly 2 years.
The party went well, and Jean and Ken got along nicely, but didn't spend a lot of time together. Ken awoke early the next morning. He and Bob Eisman had planned to do some fishing over the next few days.
So about 6:30, he called me in the morning and he said, Jean would like to go fishing with us. I said, can she fish? He said, oh yeah, she loves to fish. I said, fine.
So we went fishing the first day, and we had a lot of fun, and Ken and I were obviously sort of clicking and getting to know each other. And by the 3rd fishing trip, Ken was baiting my hook because you have shrimp here and they jiggle around a little. I'm used to worms. I mean, worms don't come back at you.
I had her hook in my hand and I had the shrimp in this hand. I was just getting ready to put the shrimp on the hook when a boat goes zoom by us and rocked our boat. She had a hold of the pole and it went up in the air and the hook went in that finger.
And he said, "Oh, you've hooked me." I said, "I hope so." And that's the truth. And in fact, we have a plaque on the wall with a gold fishing hook on that was given him by the company that said, "Dear Ken, we're so glad that you hooked Jean."
Ken and Jean began a courtship that culminated 2.5 years later in marriage on January 20th, 1987. Jean found a new artistic director for her ballet company in Evansville and moved to Sarasota. It did not take long for Sarasota's art community to discover Jean. The then chairman of the Sarasota Opera Association, Leo Rogers, contacted her and encouraged her to start a ballet series.
Leo was very persistent, and I was as equally determined that I was not going to get into building a major company that had to be funded, because that's a huge job. So we started off as a program of the opera, and the idea was that it was to, my idea was that it was to be the opera ballet in time if it took off.
With encouragement from Leo Rogers, Dean Allen, and the Opera Board, along with the help of the Development Department of the Opera, Jean began to write the grants that would lay the foundation for a ballet company. Jean had a vision, and she took that vision to the community.
I thought, well, we'll see how far this goes. And I kind of watched Jean, but I saw how effective she is and how dedicated. She was determined. And one of her greatest assets is her tenacity and her belief in art.
She transformed Sarasota. She has leadership talents, and her ability and charisma to lead and to take people where they never dreamed of going is, I believe, in large part due to her success. She had a vision, and she ignited it, and everybody lined up and said, "Wherever you go, Jean, we'll follow. What can we do to help?"
My first memory of Jean is when this very beautiful woman walked into my office, sat down and said, "I'm starting a ballet company and I want to work with our local orchestra." That was a wonderful sentiment. We were on board immediately, and it was the start of a fantastic collaboration between the ballet and the symphony.
With the help of several dedicated volunteers, Jean formulated educational programs and began bringing in visiting ballet companies, using the title Opera Presents Ballet. Her efforts were met with great success. It was obvious the community wanted ballet.
They really attended everything that came in. The Miami City Ballet came, several Southern States ballet companies, because we figured that maybe we could do a shared company situation that would not be so expensive if we had an existing company that came in for 6 months of the year here. Everything not to have to fundraise.
Within a few years, Dr. Robert Perkins of the Selby Foundation approached Jean with the idea of forming an independent ballet company.
I said, "Oh, you know, it's only the 3rd year," and I said that we need to do a 5-year study. He said that you can do it and it's time. And so we took our own 501c3 and formed the board and thought we'd give ourselves another couple of years presenting companies and making money.
Fate would again step in to speed up the process. In 1990, Eddie Toussaint and his Montreal Ballet Company was performing at the Van Wezel. The company was about to fold in Montreal, and he was looking for a home for his company in the United States. He called Jean.
I had seen the company perform. I had seen some of his ballets, which I liked very, very well. There was a kind of a simplicity and a real beauty to some of the pieces that touched me, and I looked forward to working and watching this creative ability grow, and the beginnings of the company were very exciting.
Sarasota now had its very own ballet company. The company was very successful. In the first 2 years, not only did they perform for audiences in Sarasota, but additionally toured some cities in Canada and the United States. During this time, Jean began the program Dance the Next Generation, a scholarship program dedicated to helping economically challenged children develop their artistic talent by providing selected students a 7-year scholarship program in ballet. As the company grew, Toussaint and the board began to find themselves at odds. While they loved his talent as a choreographer, they were not pleased with his management style. The board and Toussaint parted. This came at a time when the ballet was beginning a fundraising project to build a new permanent home. In addition to her role as executive director, Jean took upon herself the role of artistic director for the remainder of the 1993-94 season, while they searched for a replacement for Toussaint. It was a difficult time for the ballet and Jean. Still, the company raised $3.7 million in just over 11 months and found a new artistic director from Milan, Robert de Warren. In 1995, the company had broken ground for a new building. However, the Oslo Performing Arts Center was on the verge of financial collapse. An agreement was worked out between the two organizations that would save the Oslo and provide the ballet a state-of-the-art facility immediately.
It's quite a wonderful liaison, really, because once again it puts arts organizations together like I was used to in Europe.
Jean is on the board of the Oslo and is chairman of the development committee. And as such, she's in charge of bringing the money in, which is important, so that we can do the productions. She has been helpful in bringing the Oslo and the ballet closer together. She's really a very important person on our board and very important to the ballet as well.
With the ballet on firm ground, a growing company, a new artistic director, and a new home for the ballet, Jean has placed her focus on developing a long-term growth plan and developing a stabilization program that will ensure financial stability for the future. Additionally, she has added a new challenge, the development of a program of ballroom dancing. JeanAllenby Weidner has inspired many to reach heights they thought unattainable. She offers this advice to future generations.
I think if you have a dream, try and give yourself the best training possible. Find yourself the best school, the best mentor. Listen. And to be aware that you are part of a whole. Nobody is ever one perfect thing on their own, and I think you feel less lonely, less stressed if you're part of a wonderful group. You can be the leader of the group, you can be in the middle of the group, you can lead sometimes, you can follow sometimes. Be of your community. Be aware that no matter how good, bad, or indifferent, you're part of a whole group of people, and try and live happily and respectfully without using your elbows.
Jean has been many things to many people. Her talents and contributions to others are immeasurable. But above all else, Jean is a dancer. We ask her what it's like to experience the sensation of dance.
It's like when you dream that you're flying, or that, that you jump and you're taking these huge jumps. Well, that's how it is. There's a freedom. You suddenly can do things that feel so amazing. It's like walking, I should imagine, on a tightrope for the first time. And being able to control that. And that's the kicker with ballet. You're learning to be able to control your body. That is a wonderful thing. How many things in our lives do we have control over? That's quite a high.